Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate. No, absolutely. So, Mr. Brown, if you just want to start, like I said, I'm sure all our sort of questions and conversations will all flow together on all three of these, but if you'd like to start with 98, and Mr. Gwynn, I think there is some clarification about what actions we can take, when they would be effective, and how that process works. So just be on the ready.
So for CR 98, that's the annual allocations chart. And it comes before the county council once a year, typically in July, per the APFO regulations that state that, I think it says at least once a year, the county council shall adopt a new allocations chart. And then at the same time, they have to adopt the school capacity chart. So both actually have to be adopted at the same time. So if one is chosen not to be adopted at this time, then the other one can't be adopted at the time per the APFO regulations. And the intent of that, when the APFO regulations were created in 1992, was that these charts sort of work together. So you have a certain number of allocations projections, and those projections feed into the open closed schools chart or the school capacity chart. And so they're sort of like a team, they work together. So the allocations part of it is based on the general plan. So there's a chart in the general plan, I think it's figure 610, which sets the growth policy for the county. And so that chart was adopted in 2012 with Plan Howard 2030, and I think it's been amended a few times. It was amended after the APFO task force deliberated and made some changes to the chart based on their deliberations. So the basis of the chart that you have before you now is based on that chart. And sort of the confusing part of this, and it was apparent at the it's not confusing, it's actually an issue that I can understand can be questioned. What I mean by that is the rolling average provision.
Right.
So the way the law is set up, and there's a rolling average definition in the APFO regulations, that if all of the allocations aren't used in a certain year, then you roll what's not used into the next 3 years.
What is the purpose of that?
So I think the purpose of that
What's the
is
intent? What's the benefit to the county of that?
Well, I think the intent was that we have 10-year projections and that things aren't smooth. So sometimes you get less units than what's in the chart, and sometimes you get more. The way you can get.
There are timing differences sometimes on projects.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's actually the amount of, let's say you have 1 year where you have 800 units come in the pipeline. And then let's say you had 2,000 allocations available. But then the next year you had 1,500 come. Well, that's probably not a good example. But the point is that you don't, the chart shows 1,850 units a year. And so development's not smooth. Sometimes you get less than that. And so the intent of the regulations is if you don't use them all, you just roll them into the future years. Now, the problem is, since we haven't been achieving those totals, we've been rolling the roll since 2012. So the number's been building up and up and up. So now you have a situation where you have the general plan at 1,850, and now you're showing 3,300 in the first year. And so I can see how that's concerning, because now you have the ability to build 3,300 housing units. Now, this same thing happened the last two general plans, for better or for worse. It happened at the end of the 1990s. Where
So why do we keep doing the same thing?
Well, so what happens is they built up, but they didn't build up in every planning area. So in some planning areas they built up, in some other planning areas they didn't. So the allocations were working in the sense that it was still holding down development in some of the areas that had a high demand. And then, so it built up, and then by the time it sort of built up and this was being questioned, the next general plan was produced. And when the next general plan was produced, they went down to the policy of what that general plan stated. And then it happened again after the 2000 general plan. It kept building up, and then close to around the time we did Plan Howard 2030 in 2012, a new general plan was adopted, and then the new chart was created. And so now it's happening now. It's been, the last plan was adopted in 2012, and now we're in the 2022 allocation year, so it's been 10 years in terms of allocation years. And so it's being built up again. And so it really isn't, I don't think, intended to have happened to the extent that it did. It was really meant to be in terms of flexibility. So then you have the question, well, why did the general plan set these growth policies that's not being achieved? And so my answer to that is we're not developing as fast as the last general plan assumed we would be. And I think that relates to some of the policies in the last general plan in terms of that was around the first time Howard County started turning into like more of a redevelopment community with the Route 1 revitalization, Village Center, downtown, that kind of thing. And so it was assumed probably that there would be more redevelopment projects coming through, and it hasn't. So now we have this sort of buildup of allocations that aren't being used. And so one thing to clarify, I brought this chart here, which really shows the history of allocations, and I can pass it out if you like. And it shows that.
We actually have it. It's on the last page of.
Was it this?
Ah.
Yeah, it might be updated because we had some more projects come through, but yeah, and I think it might be up. I just updated yesterday, so but it's about the same. So basically, the intent of what this chart is showing, it really kind of shows that the number of allocations that have been given out over the last few years is slowing down. So in the current allocation, which is 2021, which ends at the end of this month, when the new, before the new chart's adopted, so far there's been 838 allocations given out, which is about half of what was given out the previous year, and you can see a decline over the last 3 years. So the amount of development that's in the pipeline is being reduced dramatically. And then in addition to that, there's only an additional 351 units that are requesting allocations that don't yet have allocations. And what I mean by that is as soon as a project comes in, it requests allocations. And then once the project is approved or reaches technically complete status, then it takes the APFO test. So far throughout this fiscal year, 838 units have received allocations, and there's an additional 351 housing units that DPZ is reviewing. So that's still, if you look at everything in the pipeline, that's 838 plus 351, around 1,200 or so allocations, which is, again, significantly less. So the point of this is to say that this chart, if it were to be adopted in the 3,300 units, I don't see those units coming forward. And there's probably two reasons why the units aren't coming forward like they have in the past, recent past, is because, number one, the amount of available land is a lot less, and that's what the general plan says. So there's just less opportunity in terms of just greenfield development. And it could be also that, given that the APFO amendments were adopted about a year ago, in anticipation that the school capacity chart that it will be is also coming forth in CR 99, and per the fiscal impact study we showed, is about 75% of the county is going to be closed to development. It could be that some developers decided not to come forward. I don't know what percentages of that, or what percentage of it is just the opportunities are less, but it's probably a combination of both. So I see moving forward that we're going to have reduced growth moving forward. It's not going to be anywhere near, the 3,300 units. A lot of the.
So then what should the target be reduced to?
So that gets to the mechanics. How can you change this chart? I think reducing it wouldn't really matter, and it wouldn't be a bad idea because it gives people peace of mind that we're not going to all of a sudden have 3,300 units in 1 year. So how you reduce it, there are two things come to mind. I think some people mentioned this, like maybe in the rolling average definition that you can roll forward, but you just can't roll greater than 120% of what it would be. Like there's a cap to the roll, so 10 years later you don't get to this point. That could be one solution, but the APFO would have to be amended. So you can adopt the chart now, and then you could amend perhaps the APFO law to change the definition of how the rolling average will work, and maybe you'd have to change the actual chart itself too. Now the other thing to keep in mind is we will be doing a new general plan, and so once that new general plan is adopted, probably 18 months to 2 years, the new policies in that general plan will be attached to the new chart. So at that point too, the allocations can be revisited and sort of reset, so to speak, based on whatever policies are discussed and adopted in the general plan.
Didn't they amend it last year? The chart?
They amended the chart last year based on the overall amended APFO bill based on the task force, yes. So the chart was amended. The total numbers didn't change, but they switched between categories.
Ah.
Yeah, so the 1850 remained the same, but the
see.
categories switched between the growth and revitalization area and the established communities area. So I can see how it looks like, we shouldn't have these 3,600 units, and it's true because it's built up over time. And the question is, how do you provide a solution for that? But what I'm saying in the meantime, there's just not that many units in the pipeline as well.
But they took out 100 units from 2023. In total, it went from 2371 to 2271.
So you're comparing,
I'm comparing what was proposed, the 2018 bill, what was proposed.
Can you say what chart you're on?
I've like literally taped it together. It's the 2018 housing allocation chart. And then the as submitted, and then the 2018 as, sorry, Jess, would you mind, do you think someone can make copies of this and then everyone can have it? Because it's literally taped together. Very high tech.
I think I have, was that from last year? Or was
Yeah,
that,
it's from,
because I
well,
have
it's
an
from
updated similar
2018.
thing. It shows how the rolling average is calculated, because I'm sure there's questions on that. So I have that, which is probably an updated that I can pass around as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm not sure there's an appetite for just waiting until the next
There's not.
general
No, there
plan.
isn't. Yeah, no, we need to
Well,
do something.
But isn't the issue that we've never hit these targets in 20 years?
Right, so
There's
like,
always a roll forward, and
there-
the market, between APFO, the market, and everything else.
yeah, and
It's
the
almost
only,
a meaningless
the only
chart.
difference is in the previous general plans, there were some areas or planning areas where there was a big demand, and so. Thank you for bringing copies. Oh, no problem. So there was a big demand, so like for Elkridge, for example, if I remember the last general plan, the allocations didn't roll up. They actually stayed the same and rolled down a bit because of the demand in that area. So in that sense, the rolling average didn't build up units, but it basically capped. This time around, it's really all of the areas that we're not seeing the units come forward at the pace. Again, there's only 1,200 units in the pipeline at this point. And if you look at the amount of land left in the county, much of the future of Howard County will be things that will require zoning changes, for example, CEF or any kind of redevelopment along Route 1, taking advantage of the CAC zones. All of the easy stuff is, in terms of development, vacant land has been done in Route 1. So any future redevelopment, which is included in these numbers, would have to be done based on redevelopment of Route 1 land assembly and taking down old buildings. And that's not happening anytime soon. There's no development in Route 1. So I guess my point is that these future units aren't going to be happening unless there's land use changes that occur.
And can we caveat that this does not include Turf Valley?
That's true. It does not include Turf Valley. Turf Valley is
Never includes Turf
is
Valley.
excluded.
Right,
And-
I just want,
yeah,
I want everybody to realize that,
Yeah.
because that's an elephant in the room.
right. And
Your
Turf Valley,
Turf Valley is our courthouse.
yeah. Turf Valley was approved in,
There's nothing you can do about it,
yeah,
and you have to deal with
yeah.
it.
It was approved in
The cost is
1986.
too great.
Yeah.
Well,
The numbers of Turf Valley are included in the projections, so we do account for Turf Valley in terms of school planning and capital facility planning and
Right,
public administration.
and I would
It just
also,
doesn't happen as quick, it's just not happening.
I would also caveat, when you made your comment about the Route 1 corridor, this doesn't include, granted, Lawyers Hill is not that huge, but it also doesn't include the potential development of the Roberts property.
I can listen all day long.
Why wouldn't it include that?
Well,
Yeah, that's my question to Mr. Brownow.
well, no, it doesn't include, does not include, well,
it
here's
hasn't
the
decided,
question.
so
So,
nothing.
so if you look at the 10-year chart of the general plan, the chart 610 was created, the number of allocations that were given out on that chart per year. The decision made by the folks at the time was to continue the same pace of allocations that were happening in the 2000s. So it kept it at that 1,850 level. And so the 1,850 level continued, but that did assume that things like the Roberts property would be, well, the Roberts property requires rezoning, right? I think.
But
Yes,
it
it
still-
does.
but it
So
still
in
has
that case, it does not include the Roberts property, because what it would include is the existing underlining CAC property in the Route 1 corridor that had redevelopment potential by right. It
Right,
did not-
it includes by right.
By right stuff. It did not
numbers,
include
okay.
any potential rezoning that could happen, like the Roberts property. And the last county council did not approve the Roberts property. So at this point, those numbers are not in
Oh, you're
in our
talking about the
projection.
Yeah.
projections.
Yeah.
I'm wondering
I have not
why
listened to
they
8
wouldn't
hours
need to
of-
pull allocations that were available.
No, they would need to pull
You're just looking
allocations.
at-
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
I was,
yeah,
I
yeah,
was,
yeah.
I was talking about
Right, right.
future projections,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The green
Right.
bars. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
it.
Talk about the,
I guess, thank you. The rolling allocations, I think, to get back to it, it makes it really hard to plan.
As long as you don't mention any
I will
current planned zoning
just-
board cases, you can.
Let's have a code word where I just shut up. When you, so it makes it really.
should
and
introduce
I'm
ourselves.
speaking to what.
Yes,
Councilman
actually,
Youngman-
please, if you don't mind for closed captioning
Okay.
or anybody who's
Right,
watching at home.
Kristen Coombs,
Oh,
Vice
sorry.
Chair of the Board of Education of Howard County Public School System.
Thank you.
Christina Delmont, Small Board of Ed.
Vicki Catronio, Board of Education.
All right.
And I will continue
Rollover
on.
allocations. Go.
The rollover allocations makes it incredibly hard to plan, because, you get these, and all of a sudden we have allocations from years prior. So I think that is part of the challenge we have. And then also to speak to what Councilman Youngman was referring to, why the waves and, why is it so hard to catch up? Also, the pattern of how we're developing, the high density is quicker, comes on board quicker. It's a shot in the arm much quicker than a housing development. Comes on slower, people move in slow. So I think, I just wanted to bring that up because I think, as we're looking at these allocations and looking at infrastructure, that I think those are two things that pose a challenge.
I know that filling up an apartment building or a condo building might be faster than selling out a neighborhood, but the development doesn't come up any faster, right? I mean, from the time somebody submits plans and you guys know it's in the pipeline to when,
But it's exponential in terms
delivered.
of the
It's
impact.
500
It's-
allocations
but
versus
it's still
49.
It's
3 or
still-
4
yeah,
years to
and
get
then
to that point, right?
Then if you look at the lease-up, so for example, in downtown Columbia, it does take time to plan and build. It's still 3-4 years out. And then the lease-up period itself in a large apartment building, if you talk to a real estate person who manages new apartments, it takes about 18 months probably to lease up, to basically have people move into an apartment building. So yes, it may be quicker than a single-family detached neighborhood where you have, 40 homes built a year. But I don't think it ends up being 500 units. Like if there's like the Savage property is one of the biggest apartments in Howard County recently, 416 units. I don't think you had people living in 416 units in 1 year when it showed up in the chart. There's a peer lease up, so yeah.
well, and we
Right.
talked
Which
about this
property
the other
Are
day.
you referring to that you said?
There's a 416 unit apartment building that was built several years ago in Savage, part of the TOD development there.
Oh,
We
okay.
talked a little bit the other day of why,
Yes, yes, yes.
Annapolis
right,
Junction,
yeah, yeah.
they
Right,
changed their
right,
name.
that's, yeah, okay,
Right, yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly, right.
But can I just jump in since there's so much going on in downtown Columbia? And I think that that's a place where a lot of this density is going to be occurring in the very near future. So I'm curious, from the school board's perspective as well as your perspective, Mr. Brownell, what do we do when you have, let's say, 2,000 units being built right now? And I don't know that that's how many units are being built, actually. But let's say that,
Between the three at the mall, it's probably 1,200 units, right? Of the Met and the 10N and N flats.
Yeah, those 3 units are 817. I just remember that because we've been
All three of them?
combined.
or
Okay, all right.
817
Yeah,
units.
combined.
And then maybe another 1,000 being built right now?
Right, in the Crescent.
Okay, in the Crescent.
well,
So,
hold on, how big are those buildings? Those buildings aren't 500.
I think it's one's like
The
two,
Met is like 390.
and
Right,
then
but the new-
200 and
Two new
something.
buildings coming up.
I think one of them is
behind Marymount.
380 or something like that
Okay.
in Crescent.
In the
then,
Crescent.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the other one, then there's some in Lakefront.
Okay, so there's
proposed.
maybe 700 under construction.
Okay,
Area
so the
three.
question is, when do we start planning for the construction of a new school?
Or a renovation and an
or,
addition,
yeah, or
or
a
a boundary
renovation and an
readjustment.
addition. When do we start that process? When do you make the request to us to say, we need this money now so that it can be built to accommodate those new students in 4 years,
So
3 years?
that would be the long-range capital plan. So if you see in there, ES 43, for example, is right now targeted to be at Mission Road. ES 44 is targeted to be in Columbia to deal with
No,
the
it's
down.
targeted to be in
It's
Turf Valley.
Turf Valley.
No,
I
not
thought it was-
necessarily.
Turf Valley.
That's up in the air.
Yeah.
Again,
Right.
so that's up in the air, depending on how things,
It's not going to stay up in the air.
David is committed.
Turf Valley.
David's committed.
I don't know, David.
I don't know,
You
I'm
might
not
wanna put on the
necessarily,
boxing
because there's
gloves,
a lot
'cause
of
it
downtown
could
Columbia
be in
development, and
Columbia.
we've
What
got
is
small,
this?
and we've got smaller schools
What
in
i-
downtown
what
Columbia.
is
That's
the
the other
Before we
thing.
get into a turf war.
But no, what's the student, we finally have some experience with the three metropolitan
getting
buildings.
better.
What's the student yield?
Very
on
low.
those buildings?
It's 13 or something from the Metropolitan,
Yeah.
Total
So
students
From
across
one
all
metropolitan.
three schools.
for 390
From-
units or
from-
whatever.
From one, right?
Yeah.
Just from one of the buildings, and there's 3 buildings right now.
Right, so if you
And
assume
then-
that they're the same
Right.
price point and they're the same kind of marketing, and I'm surprised by this, but there are not many kids coming out of that building, and it's distributed across the levels, so it's not
Right.
that it would even impact a class size.
But that was
mean-
always by design. I mean,
Right, it's not
10 years
supposed to
ago, we
be.
had long conversations about the fact that
Right.
those buildings we built, laid out, marketed, everything would not generate
They're
a
not
lot of student
child-friendly.
yield. And we were right.
They're not child-friendly,
So,
and they're very expensive.
yeah. good
And there's
call.
a lot of, studios, one bedrooms.
So before we move,
Yeah, right.
I think
the
that's
last
the big
question I
thing.
have about
It's
that.
studios and one
Right,
bedrooms.
compared to Robson Overlook, which is
As
more,
opposed to 2 and 3 bedrooms. And I don't know what the plans are for the new downtown Columbia buildings.
I think they're a similar mix,
They're probably
right?
similar,
More
yeah.
2 and 3
Mostly
bedrooms.
studio, one bedrooms, I would think, and a few 2 and 3, but not very many.
And
like
just a few 2 and
less
3.
than
Yeah.
10%.
So
yeah.
They're
let's
small.
just, yeah, let's just hope we're not surprised. I mean.
Right, I
can
mean,
you-
and granted, we
you
also
know?
have to consider what happens, I mean, I'm a Running Brook mom, and what happened when the recession happened in 08, 09, it went up from 400 kids to 500 kids because there were people there were moms that were combining households in order to save money. And so, a townhouse went from having 2 kids to having 6.
Right.
To being like multifamily so that moms could save money on rent. And so we went, it was almost overnight, in terms of going from 400 to 525, and that's why Running Brook got an addition.
Well,
But
and
again,
it's happening
still-
in the suburbs too, as families are combining in
Yeah.
big houses. It's not
Right, I
just-
mean,
Yeah.
we're seeing this increase in the number of students, and as MBIA has told us over and over again, a lot of that is
resale and,
Yeah, I mean,
turnover.
even from my court and the court across from me, when we moved in, we were the only, well, we didn't have kids technically, we moved in, I was pregnant, but almost everyone who owned was retired.
Empty
They-
nesters.
Empty nesters, original owners to their houses, and now, because I live in an older Columbia neighborhood, and now I'd say we've had at least 50% turnover just on the 2 courts where I am, of young couples either planning to have children or with school-age children. And the last question I have before we get onto the school part with the allocation chart, I just wanted to know where the 920 units increase came for 2022.
So I passed
Is
around.
that, is this, is
Yeah, this
it
is.
the rollover
This is
from
the
here?
rollover chart
Okay.
that shows.
So ignore the top part.
Actually, you're looking at last year's, I think?
Okay, right. Where are
the-
you, where's the 9?
It's so I think if you look at the second sort of table down, it says that's the current adopted 2018 allocation chart. So it's the second chart down, and what the current chart is for 2021, which is the one that we're using now, the total, including downtown Columbia, is 3,000, 216. And so, or one way to look at it is that the next year, it was 2,893 in 2022. So now that we're actually in 2022, if you do like a diagonal to the left, upper left chart, what the current chart is proposed to be, based on the rolling average, increased from, about 900, 2893 to 3813. So where they came from is below in the calculations, and all
Okay.
areas contributed to that. So because not all the allocations were given out in the growth and revitalization area,
It's the rollovers.
is the rollovers, yeah. Because
Okay,
only
I just wanted
445
to
allocations.
be absolutely clear on it.
Yeah, so about 2,800 units were available, but only 445 were given out at that time.
So it sounds, I mean, obviously, I think we're pretty much all in agreement, everyone here, that the rollovers cause a lot of issues. It's something we need to determine. It's
Yeah.
not,
It's unpredictable.
it's not something we can amend with this current chart, but it is something that we can change in the code for next year's chart.
Yeah,
Or
right.
change in the
Right.
plan.
No, it's not clear to me. Why can't we amend it in this chart?
Because this is a resolution and that's in the code.
What's in the code?
The provision
The rolling
stating the
average.
rollovers.
I thought we talked about how the last council amended the same chart.
They amended the chart, but this would be eliminating rollovers altogether. It'd be changing the code to pull out rollovers.
So why do we have to approve this chart before we change the code concerning allocations? Why now?
You don't have to approve this
You-
chart now. So the way, if you want.
I was just saying they're two separate paths. They're not.
No, they're not. That's what I'm saying. Why?
Well, if you-
In our first year, wouldn't we go about fixing the process and executing it the way that we want it to be?
Oh, no, I'm saying you can't eliminate the whole process of rollovers via this one chart.
No, but if we're going to amend the code, if we're all in agreement that we shouldn't have allocations or we should seriously
I think
curtail
we
the
should have
amount that we can.
allocations, but we don't have
Or
rollovers.
whatever, the rollovers, that we would, speak for your own district,
We need investment.
that we would fix the law now and then approve a chart that coincides with how we think the law should be. And I don't understand
So
why
what-
it's this
so why
like that.
why would you get rid of all the rollovers, though? It's a long-term plan. But,
'Cause it's done so
I mean, there shouldn't be unlimited rollovers, but it's a
Right.
long-term plan. If you're trying to do 10,000 units over 10 years,
Right.
and you only do 800 one year,
Do you want to
why
lose
wouldn't you
everything?
do 1,200 the next year?
Right, so I think the
Well,
rollover
the
itself.
You think that there
Predictability.
should be
Cap
a
the
cap,
percentage.
right,
There should
Jeff?
be, I think the best solution would be a
Yeah.
cap because it's provided predictability, and so you don't run into this, 10 years down the road after the general plan. Or maybe like you do like a 5-year visit or something like that, and you adjust,
Like
something like
evaluation.
that.
From
Yeah.
a legal
planning
standpoint.
From a planning standpoint for the school board as
It's
well,
different.
how's
Right,
that?
But from a
need-
legal
yeah.
standpoint, so it would leave the previous year's allocations in place functionally, right? If it didn't, if you guys don't adopt the new chart, then it just leaves the old one in place, right?
Right, yeah.
Oh, yes, in terms of the chart, but.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
But Liz is asking, why can't we
'Cause it
change?
We don't null, it doesn't
Why,
get
why
nullified
why
by
this
you guys
month?
not
Why this
voting.
chart? Why don't we fix the law and then revise whatever the next chart is in accordance with that and rely on the existing chart until then?
Can I ask a question? Is there anything, I think a good first step would be to change the chart to not only reflect what is happening in that year, but also the rollover number. Because when people look at it,
Right, it just looks
it-
preposterous.
It looks ridiculous. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the
is
constant
because for
rollover.
me, there is value to knowing how many units are rolling over in addition to what that year's allocation is, because it gives me some idea of what is happening in that particular in that particular area. So
Right.
I think, I'm a great believer in more information as detailed as possible, because the last thing I want is anybody to look at a chart and go, this makes no sense to me.
Oh, well, then we're all in the wrong line of work.
I know, well, at least there's always something to do. But I think that would help us, because then when we look at it, we could say, oh, okay, the new ones are coming are X, and the rollover is Y. So then we know what that looks like, and then that will hopefully better inform decisions moving forward.
Right, and I agree with that. And by having a cap, you can see the process, you can see the numbers, and then just cap it. One quick thing about how it's difficult for predictability purposes, I can certainly see that. Just want to clarify that when I work with the school planning office, I don't give them projections of what is in this allocation chart. So I don't say, okay, next year by 2022, there's going to be 3,800 housing units built. I base it on what's actually in the pipeline.
On permits.
Yeah,
So
because
then
we want
where-
to try to be as accurate as possible. So if we only have 800 units in the pipeline, then the projections that I give the school system have those 800 units in the pipeline. And there's no way you're going to have 3,800 units by 2022, because we only have 800 now, and it takes 3 years to build.
And
to-
that's
to
why,
put
for
the plan
example, the
process.
Roberts property is not in there
Yeah.
because there's,
So the projections I give the school system, they're not based on these allocations. They're based on.
Liz can hear all she
actual
wants.
development
Cut me
in the
off.
pipeline.
So does the 838 then, does that include all the downtown development? I mean, do you break it out for the school
Yeah, I
board when
do.
you?
I do break it
You
out.
break it out for the school board to say, this,
Why don't we
'cause
adopt that
we
chart?
need it by region.
that's
Yeah.
the chart.
That's the chart we
I
want.
So-
That's what we
Yeah.
want,
We
because
want
it
that
doesn't
chart.
tell us
Useful
where it's
chart.
going or where it's
So
being
here-
allocated.
Well,
here's-
that would be the project, yeah.
This is the breakout of all of the 838, and I only have one copy, but you can make copies of this. And this is the details of it.
So can we have a quick,
Every project by,
I mean, I don't understand how you go about doing that. Like, so I'm developer LLC, I come in, I
Uh-huh.
say I'm gonna put in a 500 unit development here. And you say, okay, let me look and see, oh yeah, established communities, I still have this many left over, you can have all 500 right now. How do you decide it's gonna be this year, and yes, this year, and this amount, and this amount, and this amount?
Yeah, so the way it works is when we do the projections every fall, and if there's a sketch plan in process, of 20 units, then we know that a sketch plan, which is the very initial part of the planning process, takes about 3 years to go through the planning process and build. So we project those units are going to be there in 3 years. If it's a site development planning process, which is right near the end of the process, those units are likely going to be there next year. So we base it on the plan that's in process, the type of plan, thinking when they're going to come online as best we can. For those larger projects, like 500 units, we phase those out over time.
And just to
And-
clarify, it's
yeah.
all based on current zoning. So whatever a property's current zoning is, not whether, if it's before the planning board or whatever, or the zoning board, it would,
Right.
whatever existing residential is there, whatever zoned residential
Mm-hmm.
is there, that is what it would be calculated
Correct,
in.
yes.
you
yeah.
don't assume that it would
Yeah.
be converted.
Well, like the
Right.
milk people,
Right.
like the milk people you're planning for, whatever their
Yeah, so
underlying zoning is.
that's a good example, because for the milk producers, a very large property, we've been presuming.
Because it could go mixed use, but it's not.
We've been presuming mixed use for many years, because that could have been the most units. So actually, when the plan came in and they're not developing under mixed use, they're coming in with less units than we had projected. But now that we have the sketch plan in process, we actually know how many units.
Right.
We're going to be projecting those units moving forward and trying to phase it as best we can. They're not all going to come in, next year. It's going to be probably 4 or 5 years that these are going to be built out.
So when you do these projections based on current zoning, you are assuming highest density use,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Because you
yeah.
wouldn't want to assume under and then you,
Right, we don't know. So we do
Right.
take, the numbers that we project are probably, the first 3-4 years are the most critical for many reasons, right? It's the operating budget, it's the near-term capital budget. Those are based on the plans that we have in process. It's a 10-year chart. It does get a little bit more speculative as you move forward, and it could be projecting or making random assumptions on when development could occur based on zoning.
right?
Years 8, 9, 10, that kind of thing. So the numbers are in the chart, but if they don't come forward, then they'll never show up. Yeah.
And process-wise, to your point earlier, okay, so we could table the allocation chart and table the school open-close chart. We change the code, and that would be voted on in July, but then it would be 60.
September.
Oh, right, because Thursday's already happened, unless we all vote to introduce it, I suppose. I'm just trying to see if we changed that, then it would be 60 days, 62 days until it goes into effect unless we did an emergency,
A
but,
bill takes 61 days to be effective.
61, that's
You
it.
could adopt resolutions to be concurrent with the bill.
But what's
Oh,
the backstop you're
okay.
concerned with? What are you trying to get it done by, or are you?
oh, no, it was more like if we change the underlying code to then allow us to change the chart differently, but then would the code change be in effect to allow us to
Oh, I see.
do the chart change at the same time? I hope that made sense. It was clear here.
Right, so you wouldn't have the new allocations until the code change went into effect.
Oh, but you would approve the resolution concurrent with the previous bill to allow them to go together
Yeah.
procedurally?
I believe you could adopt the resolution to be effective upon the effective date of the bill, if the bill has been approved.
I'd agree with that. And also, just a point of clarification, I know we're talking about rollovers, and the council is required to adopt a housing allocation chart and the school capacity chart each year. So, I mean, it's not a matter of
Within
not
the fiscal
adopting-
year or within the calendar year?
By July 1st or something?
No, I don't think there's a set time.
There's not a deadline, but there's a
And-
requirement each year, so that's a good question, whether it's the fiscal year count. I would think that it's the, no, I don't want
It
to say
seems to
right
go
now.
off
I
fiscal
wouldn't-
year, though.
I don't want to say whether it's a calendar year or fiscal year, but there is a requirement to do it annually. And
Well, so that sounds calendar year.
Well,
But if, it's submitted to follow the fiscal year, but
Yeah.
annually sounds like calendar year.
Right.
Yeah?
It has,
So as long as you
It
do
has
it by
occurred in the
December
fall in the
31st?
Oh, it has occurred in the fall in the past.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Here's a concern that I have. And I know that the optics of having this 3,000 number are silly. They're never going to get built. Why have the public thinking that they could get built? But we can't let this process open to where there's no carryover at all, because then the entire planning function is gone.
No,
You know,
I mean, I'm happy to discuss a cap.
But if we open this process, they're starting redistricting. It's like 2 years ago all over again. We will have voices in here that don't want any rollover because they don't understand it, and then we'll lose that as a planning tool. And I
Well,
think
because
we
they
need
live
to
in District 1, where all of the rollovers have gone. I mean, come on. I mean,
And
that,
Jeff, you've
you're for
suggested
sure right. You're going to get
120%
everybody
as
along
a
the Route
cap?
1 corridor that's going to
I
say,
think that's reasonable.
lay off.
100 Yeah.
You think
And I
120%
understand that,
Right.
and I understand that. I get it.
So we want to
But-
shuffle it around, that's fine, but if all of those rollovers are concentrated over and over again in a singular district, in a singular pocket of schools,
Or keep-
that's
yeah.
not, that can't possibly be how that was
How can
supposed
they
to
be?
work.
I mean, Howard High School's going to be closed for another 4 years,
So,
right?
yeah, and we.
Except for a waiting period.
So
which
we are,
is
we know that
Eventually
there's,
going to get on.
Well, that's good. Okay, that's
if you were to adopt the chart now, and then you were to amend it, and then the change happens before the next general plan, what happens at the end of this year, for example, after the September, I really don't think it's going to, you're not going to have 3,000 units in that period of time. The other thing to keep in mind is if you don't adopt the allocation chart now, you can't adopt the school capacity chart now.
You can or cannot?
Cannot.
Not, because they have to be together.
They do have to be together? Why do they have to be together?
Mr. Gwine?
Per the county code, they have to be adopted concurrently.
Can I just add one other thing?
Always.
The planning areas also, you can double up. You know, Oxford Square had green allocations along with Route 1 revitalization. So that's another, I know it's not directly related to, but one development can get 3 different planning area allocations. And I think that is also, can impact the ability to plan. Because you think, when you think allocations going to a certain area, you think different geographical areas.
Right.
But
We talked about this the other day, and I think this is one of the big problems in District 1. I disagreed with Ms. Catronio in saying that the units came
not
on
unusual.
faster. We disagree a lot. That the
Brothers and
units
sisters
come,
fighting.
that the units come on faster, because I think the planning and zoning process is long, but the projects are so much bigger. The student yield is so much bigger, and that's why you see, when it does come on, it hits 1 or 2 schools really hard.
Really badly. And
Well,
I didn't
mean, we have
appreciate the
Route 1
zoning
in
board
ours
thing.
In 3, so it's not like it's only happening in 1.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, I know, but I didn't, without getting into the specifics of any particular case before the zoning board, if you're not even including in your projections these massive developments that require a zoning change even to build in, that's another like completely unaccounted for hit that all of a sudden jumps in as soon as that zoning board approval comes in, so.
But then how would we know who's going to apply for that in the future?
That was a big hole I didn't know about, and I can imagine that there would be lots of zoning board cases looking for zoning changes that would have significant implications in terms of student generation rates. And so if those aren't even in these kinds of projections, then that, that concerns me. I don't know the answer to that. I think that the code allows us to do it once a year or any other time we feel like it. So if we have to do it concurrently and approve, right, I feel like doing it next month. So if we have to do it concurrently, then we can approve the allocation, because I do want these Apfo limitations to come in. That was a hard-fought battle. There is no way we can have that lapse. But so if the code ties our hands and we have to approve this thing that is the allocation chart, then we can revisit this issue sooner rather than later. I hope that the appetite is there from my colleagues on the council to actually do it and not wait for another year or 18 months for a general plan or all that. But I did not appreciate that the allocation, the open-closed schools chart had to be concurrent with the allocations, and that is problematic.
Right, that's what I mean, like, we'd have to table, but that was my concern, if we tabled both and changed the code, would everything align in time? But if you can tie the resolutions to bills.
But is that not correct? We could revisit it again in a month.
That's correct.
Well, we could emergency introduce it if we got four of us.
It has to be, the council is required to adopt both charts at least once per year.
But we could do it more
So you can amend it more than once.
And in the past, it's been delayed a little bit to, like, instead of July, like September, or I think in the latest November. And that question came up again, and it was sort of a question of, well, what does that mean? And I think at the conclusion it was in that calendar year, and so that sort of counted.
So it doesn't.
But one of the important things to adopt it every July also
That's what I
is,
wanted
and
to
there's usually
clarify.
big reasons why it's delayed. For example, one year we did a general plan, I think, something like that. It's happened a couple times, but it's the fact of the predictability. It's important to have a predictable process that every year these charts are adopted in a concurrent manner for the folks that are in the development community and the residents and the school projections, so there's a predictable process. If something is not working because we have a big buildup of the rolling average, and that can be addressed through an amendment to the general plan or the Apfo law. But I think it's important to have and that can happen after, but it's important to adopt the chart, every year.
And does it need to be adopted within 12 months from the last time it was adopted?
That just says annually.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah.
And that's why it came up last time, and it was within the year, so it was deemed okay to delay it by 3 months or something like that.
And I actually thought there was an issue that there would be some benefit to doing it more in line with the school calendar enrollment. I thought there was some discussion even late in the last council's four-year term about syncing up how we're projecting with year-by-year numbers, so that the charts that we're looking at as part of these two resolutions coincide with the projections that are in the. Yeah, so, I mean, if moving it to a September, October instead of a June, July, do we?
So we get a September 30th official enrollment.
Does that enable us to use more realistic actual numbers than a better year's worth of data?
Because honestly, we actually would use the prior year's September 30th, because we use official enrollment, so that would. It would make
Well,
more
except,
So if we did it-
but again, the projections,
projections.
projections are not
but-
related to allocations directly. The projections, the long-term ones are, because there's a cap from the allocations, but the projections that we give the school system every September are based on plans in the process in September. So it's always updated annually based on what's in the planning process. So the timing doesn't matter in terms of when this chart is adopted, really. It's because we look at what's actually in the pipeline.
Because our process starts with the capital planning process in the fall. No, but I know, but the whole.
And they're
The whole
linked.
feasibility study kickoff.
Right, there was a discussion for a number of years of what numbers to use in the school. Should we use
Yeah.
last year's feasibility 18 months ago?
No.
Or should we use
should
this
not.
year's? And I know that the school board is, you're discussing how to revise that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue, and I think it does span, even though I'm so D1 centric, it does span across all 5 districts, and I think it deserves a really in-depth analysis. And again, I think we can get it right in our first year and have a real positive impact over the term of our.
Not only in D1
standard.
and you're just, but
Yeah,
in
that's
the
what I'm saying.
north,
It's not just me, I
with
know.
Councilman Young.
Yeah. I'm
running out of
Ellen
space.
City
The whole
Governor.
Route 99 corridors. But
Yes.
But I just,
Well, and-
I gotta,
downtown Columbia.
Development in
Route
3
1.
is impacting 4.
Though-
No, it's
We've
not
all
just
got it.
D1.
But
Yeah.
actually, I will say something really interesting that I noticed from the school capacity chart and some of the supporting documents that were given. So there's so much, and I am fully willing to recognize that I have this bias because I live in a 1970s neighborhood, so that's what I see more often versus living in a new community and seeing that all residents came from there. And also, my children's school district does pull from a 1, so we do have new people there, but still the vast majority of students are coming from that turnover. So Cradle Rock is going to be closed. It goes from 94 to 109. And it is certainly a community that is predominantly built out. There's no significant new building of student housing. I mean, there's like
It's a mature area,
it's a
is what you're
mature,
saying.
yes, it is a mature area.
Even like even just from September to May, they gained 24 students, so.
Right, but that's what I mean,
Right.
that turnover, and the last time that they were redistricted was 2004.
They need relief.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like,
Yes.
you have what I would say
Established
Bryant Woods
boundaries.
Elementary is another example. The neighborhood is turned over. There's been no new
Right.
development, but they're overcapacity. They're closed now, I think. And
Well,
just a small school with it's.
sorry, could you repeat
Well,
the school for me?
Bryant Woods Elementary.
Well,
Yes.
while you're on Cradle Rock, though, but if you look at the local and state rated capacity, the
You're
numbers
gonna have to
are,
direct me to the right chart.
the numbers are so far
Yes.
Well,
different.
Cradle Rock has a Judy Center, which is a pre-K program, so that utilizes space. And remember,
Well, that's like a trailer in the yard, the Judy Center.
I'm wondering if that school's getting closed because, of how we're calculating the capacity versus.
Oh, because it's
the enrollment.
conjoined?
It's conjoined to Lake Elkhorn and.
Yeah.
And
they
is
had to
that
split
included
it.
in the
It used to be-
capacity?
no, they're separated
They're
from a
separated,
square
but it's
footage
kind of-
standpoint now.
Okay, so it's not considered in the capacity. But the reason I brought it up is because, and I get why your focus is on new construction, because you have so much of it happening in D1, but my issue with, and some of the testimony on Monday really centered on this, it was like, we're getting more students, we need more schools, buy new land and build a new school, and it's like, neighborhoods change.
Totally hear you, and it's hard to predict when that's going to happen, and we have to be kind of retrospective about it, but certainly, I hear you. I mean, Hammond Elementary is going to be hit hard
Yes,
with the
milk people.
milk
Milk
people.
producers.
Milk
And
producers,
Crossings,
right.
Yeah.
But we do have these old, and these
Well,
schools are
actually-
old, and they can't hit, the cafeterias are small, the gyms are small, they're not, you can add portables, but these schools really feel the brunt of it when they're over capacity more than a newer school would.
But I would also say that Hammond Middle is going to feel the brunt of it because
yes,
there's a
absolutely.
significant amount of senior citizens living in those neighborhoods who have had 30, 35 years in that house, maybe creeping up to 40, and they're getting ready to move on. So it's surrounding Walker neighborhood is in imminent turnover stage.
Well,
So I guess my point is that the answer is not buy more, to me, the answer is not always buy more land, build giant new capital projects. It's like, how do we calculate that neighborhood turnover? Because obviously there is some standard that you guys are using. And so why are we not looking at some of our older schools? Oakland Mills is getting hit. So looking at the renovation and addition on land we already own versus buying new land, building giant new capital projects.
But we are also limited, like Bryant Woods doesn't really have any room to expand.
That's because it's adorable.
But it's one of those tiny
Yeah.
community
But
schools.
can we get back to your
But
question?
there are some that
Right.
can't.
Really
Yeah.
was to Jeff,
The-
how do we calculate neighborhood turnover so that we can plan better
Oh,
for these
for the
schools? That was your
Well,
question.
that
I
was
want to get back to
the
your
first
question.
half of it, because the second half
Uh-oh.
was,
I
I'm
didn't
not
get to that
sure
question.
that, for CB 17, how, are we sure that that's the right number? Because when, in our previous conversations, it was based off of finding new land, buying new land, building a totally brand-new school. And as we shift to a redevelopment, is that what's the base data that we need to be using?
Right, and so that question's come up a lot over the last few years, particularly during the APFO debate. And we have we have data, and we've recently updated it, that shows that many of the schools that are facing overcrowding there's been no development in those districts. So a lot of it has to do with resales. As far as calculating resales and the impact of resales, the school, we don't do that. We give the school system the housing unit projections from DPZ. So they would be better to answer that. Renee Kamen. But from what I understand, they do have the projections, and they're having, I guess, an outside expert also review these. They look at historical turnover by school district. So they look at historical turnover of housing, and they're able to track that because they know student addresses. So they know if there was no student in a house one year, and now there's a student in the house the next year, and they know that that house was sold, then they determine that that new student was from housing resales. So they try to create a rate. So some neighborhoods turnover have a trend, right? So there's more of a
Okay.
turnover. So they don't have a countywide turnover rate. They have different school districts based on empirical history.
Yep.
So they have like a 3 or 4 or 5 year trend, and they say, well, we're getting 5 new students on average per neighborhood or something. So we're going to continue that we're going to assume that trend continues. So we're going to try to project that neighborhood turnover is going to contribute X number of students moving forward in that neighborhood.
Yeah, but keep in mind, the other piece of this is you're defining neighborhood as attendance area, which is the school district.
Right.
That we change. So we're not comparing apples to apples. And to me, that is the problem, is because when we look at it by attendance area, if we redistrict, I can't compare that attendance area here to this attendance area here because there are different polygons in it, and we've moved things around. That is
Well-
part of the challenge.
But so is it, it's like, there's a polygon, there's a polygon.
Give us another.
Yep. There's like a green one, there's a pink one, they run. This is closer to a polygon.
It's a polygon with apartments.
Yeah, multifamily, there you go.
It's a high rise.
It's a high rise. So when, and I recognize it's a little unfair because this is not your process, but maybe the three of you do. So currently, all of these guys go to the same school, and it's calculated. Well, I guess they don't move. So like, all of these guys go to the same school, and then the next redistricting happens, and this is one school, and that's one school. Are these turnover rates calculated by polygon? Or are they, because that would give you apples to apples, right? The polygon.
I so feel you. Yes, that would give us apples to apples, but we are being told that we can't do it by polygon because that isn't accurate enough. To me, if
Who's
I
telling
look
you
at a
that?
polygon.
Why, what, wait, sorry, you're gonna have, what?
Oh,
Yeah, no, we're being told by whom?
We were told,
And
we've
why?
been told by
Office of School Planning.
Office of School Planning, and they had some consultant come in, and they said that it's, when the sample size is too small, the accuracy is not as good, which I understand to some extent. However, the other part of my brain says, if I'm looking at a particular polygon, and I want to know what's happening in that particular polygon, because keep in mind, back in the day, the theory was that the polygons were created so that they would be 100 elementary school kids in each polygon, which apparently is no longer true. So when you look at a polygon.
Definitely not throughout the county.
Not
'cause
throughout the
obviously
county, right.
Where
And
I
it-
live and where Vicky lives are completely different.
Right, exactly. So,
You'd be like 3 polygons.
more cows than children. So then you have the polygon, and let's look at the milk producer polygon. Okay, let's
Right.
assume for argument's sake that that polygon includes that property as well as an existing community. That polygon number is going to vastly change when those units come online. So the question becomes, okay, then maybe we would have to move someone. You know what I'm saying? Because we get
Right.
the influx. Because for us, whether the students come to us by a new housing development, we're going to have more concentrated students at one time, especially depending on the type of development. If it's a apartment building, we're going to end up with more kids than a development with single-family home. You know what I'm saying, depending on the
But
size.
even single-family home new construction tends to attract that young family.
Right,
And they might be preschool age, but.
Right, but I will tell
Right,
you.
there could be a lag.
There used to be this thought in Howard County that people with students didn't live in apartments. I have news for you. People with students definitely live in apartments.
I consider it daily, every time I rake my yard.
I see.
Well, and that's where, like, if you look at our.
You have slides in front of your house.
If you look at the four different types of housing, single-family attached and single-family detached are the most accurate.
Okay.
Single-family.
Townhome
Townhome
and
and
single-family
single-family
detached.
Single-family
Those yields
detached
are the
have the
most
most
accurate.
accurate yields.
So
Yeah,
why-
But the apartments.
Apartments just don't have an accurate.
Because it's too much mobility.
So
They're
why?
That's
always
true,
moving in
too.
and out.
So is the
Yeah.
difference between a
'Cause if the lease
condo
is 6
and a
months
rental?
Versus
Yeah.
12 months.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, like, and the consultant was honest about that the other night when he was doing the presentation to us. He's like, that's the biggest area of, lack of predictability.
So I
But
guess
that's
the
where we're
question
building.
is
Right,
where or
and-
why not have your units of measure not be based on a number of students, but on geographical boundaries?
Well, there's an attempt to kind of do both, and that's, and I don't want to go into this too much, but that's one of the things that, when we've struggled in the past with whether to have an outside consultant look at our redistricting process, they're not familiar with our neighborhoods and the way that there's an egress or the
Right.
way that there's a natural flow of students and where they hang out and how the county is laid out. So that, yeah, on a map it might look this way, but in reality, this is the way that that neighborhood flows together.
Deb and I have a street like that off 216, right by Hammond Elementary. If you looked at a map, looks like all the houses are clustered together. The only ingress egress is off 216. It's totally weird for it to be in District 3. but-
Right, yeah, that's exactly, so there needs to be that local input of how the community, feels, like, where
But
do
could
you
it
go
be worked
shopping?
together?
Well,
I
that
mean-
is the
Yeah, no,
challenge.
there needs
Because
to
like,
be
if
local
this is your
and.
geographic boundary and then that's now there, then you would know that this is the apartment now.
Speaking to the unpredictability of apartments, and you look at how many apartments we build per year, and then you can kind of, like, in 2017, we issued use and occupancy permits for over 1,000 apartments, and the year before was 232. So year by year, the composition of what we're,
Yeah.
the units, that can kind of impact how unpredictable it is. If there's more apartments being built that year than detached houses, you can kind of gauge just how predictable we are on that. If it's so unpredictable, and when you build most of your, 52% of our building in 2017 was apartments.
But how much of that was downtown Columbia?
Most of it was Elk Ridge at that
Okay.
point.
Like Port Capital.
No, that's
Right,
fine. The
right.
only reason I ask is because, well, like,
And that,
Opal lives in Port Capital, but,
but downtown Columbia then kind of muddies the water because it's not typical.
right,
you're
that's,
right, we
that's
should
where I
be
was
looking
trying
at this
to
by-
analyze,
Right,
like,
so it's
area.
really hard, and so what we have been trying to ask for is to get more specific, localized yield data.
yeah, it really does. I mean, that's.
It really does. You see, and that's the
Yeah.
piece,
We
I
know
understand.
what we're doing isn't working, so why do we?
Why are we continue to do what's not giving, right, I mean, to me, the better accuracy we can obtain, the better it is going to be for
Yeah.
everybody. It may be a pain in the patootie to do it this way, but
I'd rather rip the
The
Band-Aid
more
off.
How
accurate.
rational our investment in capital infrastructure or not is.
Yeah,
Well, and you should be able to take a bigger neighborhood, take Valley Mead, take Dunlogan. You should be able to have some past experience to be able to say, okay, we see the number of high schoolers coming out of that neighborhood reducing. We might see a little tick up in the elementary school kids.
As it
That
turns out.
neighborhood is turning over
Right.
now. That neighborhood is at turnover time. Or if it's the age of the neighborhood.
right, that's what I mean.
Neighborhoods turn over every 20 years. There's got to be some ability to kind of know when a neighborhood's going to start to turn over.
Well, and high schools are usually, like, you don't see a lot of influx on high schools. You see it in elementary schools. And it starts to dwindle as you go up in grades, but.
I mean, like again, use my neighborhood, for instance. I guess it probably started happening when the houses were about 15 years old. You saw a couple big graduating classes from high school, and then that high school number has dropped down. That should signify, hey, you know what? this neighborhood's gonna turn over, we need to make, granular is a great word, assumption for this neighborhood. You're not gonna be able to do it for, we don't have big subdivisions everywhere, but.
Averaging
would-
across the county is not working.
No.
No.
Well, so, they do it at the district level again. I think the issue is in the.
You mean the school catchment area?
School,
Yeah,
yeah,
school
the school level. When
Thank you.
redistricting happens, that's when it gets complicated and sort of confusing. But assuming redistricting doesn't happen, then maybe there's a different methodology for that. But assuming redistricting doesn't happen, I think it's a good methodology because you're sampling a big size of what's happening in terms of turnover, and you're just carrying that forward. So it is a way to look at recent trends to be able to at least factor that part of the projections in the equation.
But then the
When you're
redistricting
it's
needs to
important.
happen because the turnover issue.
No, it does, and maybe there's a
If
different
there's
methodology.
not-
Right.
Right,
Yeah,
like if
yeah.
family, like Group A buys, their kids go through the system, they're 80% of their polygon. And that exists that way for 15 years, and then it starts to turn, like, that polygon's going to need to be shifted because instead of having 200 kids in it, it now has 50 or 25.
Yeah, Longfellow's a great example of that, where you have townhouses that are supplying more of the children rather than the existing homes, the
Yeah.
single-family homes.
Because those people are still living in
Those
those
people are still
homes.
living there.
Yeah.
Just like my neighborhood.
Right.
At Clary's. When I moved in, there were 25 kids at the bus stop on the corner. Now there's one.
Right.
So how
Right.
do you balance that? And everybody's, people have lived in that neighborhood for a really long time, which goes to,
And we have a very strong
Yeah.
aging in place program in
Right.
Howard County. And so we're
they may
encouraging
stay
that.
there longer than what, I mean, it
That's where it needs
goes
to be
to.
granular.
Yeah, it goes to Councilmember Rigby's point earlier about her neighborhood turning over, not turning over. When do they turn over? Does it mean that everybody's going to turn over at once? Or as you just pointed out, Ms. Coombs, this is, because we are surrounded by the neighborhoods where people have stayed, they're 81, they're 92, they moved in 50 years ago, and they are still living in their homes. So there is
And they
no.
keep up with their yard, so I feel real bad about myself.
I guess they get somebody to take care of it, but they're.
No, they're out there.
You have little kids.
I'm
they're
just
out
saying,
there.
it's a different, and without knowing sort of the background of those neighborhoods, it's hard to predict what's
But they
going to
would have the
happen
sale
in
trend
those
data.
neighborhoods.
Well, they have,
Right, and
so
I feel
it-
like on
yeah,
sale
right,
trend
right.
data, we're stronger in terms of knowing the resale. It's the apartments and it's the new developments, because sometimes, then if you get, and this is gonna sound bad, but I have heard anecdotally that, when Gaither Farm got built, there were very few people, they had children, but none of them were sending them to Howard County Public Schools.
They
Well,
all go,
they
to-
can
they all
pay
go
the
to Glen Oak
taxes.
Country School.
So,
That's
That
fine.
is also what I've heard.
Yeah.
And that's what I've seen, because my daughter went to those same schools
right,
as your daughter.
Right.
So, yeah.
Back to the apartments, and I know we've been talking about the resales, but as antiquated as the system might be, we're at least fairly good at that, like we're close on those numbers.
right.
But we really need, on these apartments, to be looking at it more than once a year. Is there some way school planning can?
Check our work.
Or
Yeah,
you guys.
check your work.
Can do every
Go by
6 months.
development and what
Right,
came
because
out
we
of a
have their
one-bedroom apartment,
addresses in
two-bedroom apartment,
Synergy, and
three-bedroom
so
apartment.
we would like to press for more granular data so that we can get more accuracy by attendance area.
Yeah, I mean, because we're going, I mean, if anyone's surprised, we're going into redistricting. And one of the things that I would like to see,
brand new.
because I've asked for this, is for when we get the polygon numbers, when we get the polygon, we should know how many kids are at least in that polygon at that point in time, and see
Yes.
going out.
That seems that's not something that's currently happening?
Right.
So,
So what
And
do you get
currently,
when
to
you
Ms.
get the polygon? What-
we get, I'm gonna say this is.
Can you ask that again?
What does the polygon, if it doesn't show how many kids are in the polygon at that time, what
We
what
just-
information do you get about that polygon when you?
I can say, I'm speaking as an individual board member, I think we can do a much better job in how we are doing the process of redistricting as board members when we're making the decisions. Because, and Ms. Coombs can agree with me or not, because she went through this with me. It's basically, we sit around, well, can we move that one? Move 23 and try 24 and try 25. It's almost like, it's
But
a
then
little
the
bit
dominoes fall and you
then
mess
the
up
dominoes fall.
feeds.
But, so, part of it is to, I know I had asked for questions about, had asked for data as to how many kids were in polygons and trying to figure out what was going to happen with that polygon. Because I'm thinking, we're moving something at a specific point in time, right? And we're then trying to figure out what are we going to think is going to happen in the attendance area that we're creating. Because the last thing we want to do is move students and then still have the schools be more overcrowded.
Right, 'cause
than
of
they
the
were
turnover rate or
previously.
whatever.
Right, because we have all these different factors coming in. So I think the question for the board, we did that to Porter's Run. I think the question is for this board moving forward to this redistricting process is how can we do a better job and have more data in order to better inform the decisions that we make. We're never going
Yeah.
to be 100% correct. It's just not going to happen.
And we hope that investing in new software will allow us to get more information too. And so that's going to be part of the process, is to do parallel, examinations of what the projections are.
Ms. Walsh?
I imagine that we're wrapping this up.
We
pretty soon.
are. You,
So I
you,
wanted.
you have the last word.
Oh, yay. I wanted the opportunity to in support of CB 17, which was tabled last month because of the budget, but I think is certainly tied into the allocations and the school capacity chart. And
Yeah, that's why we put them all together.
if you guys haven't seen it, the chart that has the most import to me and why I propose something like CB 17 is the one that Mr. Bronow posts online all the time, but we have the latest version of it, which is the wait list. And to me, at this point, it illustrates that the 5 years that we're doing right now doesn't work. That what happens is a project waits its term there and then comes out, regardless of it's adding 2 kids into the system or 2 households, because this isn't kids, this is households, but 2 households or 250 households. And there's no provision for providing for them other than redistricting or putting another couple trailers in the back. And so if what we're doing works, if we improve the process, if we get better software and do better, then maybe, schools bust out or projects bust out of a waiting bin. But we know right now that the existing waiting period does not work, does not give our school system time to redistrict or to find and build new schools. And the 7-year term came from explicit statements from Dr. Marano saying, this is how long it takes me to find a site and fund project.
But that was my
This is how long it
issue.
takes me to design. But
It
that's
shouldn't
fine.
just be finding a site. We have many sites.
But we have the
Yeah,
feasibility
we
study.
do own some in some areas, but not necessarily where they're needed.
Right, and so we have the charts, we know where the capacities are, and none of them across the county, right? We can shift kids all over the place, but the reality is that right now, we're at 100%. And 105, 110, 115, we're at 100%. And if adding 3 more years onto that term gives us some breathing room and gives us the ability to catch up, then I don't know why we wouldn't employ that tool. I
feel that sometimes that it is entirely possible that the time currently is not being utilized. It's not that the time doesn't exist, it's that it's not being utilized.
But we
Yeah,
have
I
the
think-
feasibility study. We know 43, 44,
I
high
mean, we
school
have-
14.
right, we
We're
have
not
a
going to have those
capital
online.
plan. I mean, we're still in the midst, the county's still in the midst of negotiating the Turf Valley site, which contributes to my cynicism. But, it's 3 years for an elementary and a middle.
But it's not just the capital plan. I mean,
But we
talking
have
about
that.
a Route 1, not Route 1, a District 1, you have this Longgate Townhouse project. It's been on the books for 5 or 6 years. So why in the world hasn't either a capital project or redistricting happened? I mean, 5 years is a long time.
And this is the number of units getting out because of the 4-year max wait. If you look at the history of Apfo since '92, there's probably been a half a dozen projects between then and maybe 3 years ago that have reached that point.
No.
So this is a relatively new phenomenon where last year we saw some,
Reached that
this year.
point,
So,
came out.
and so then the question is, why is this happening now where it didn't happen in the past? And I think there's a number of reasons for that. Could be. One is that the school system
that we didn't build any
Hasn't been
schools.
Let him
redistricting.
finish.
We
I don't
also
think it's not
stopped
just building-
redistricting.
Hasn't
Exactly.
redistricted, and it's not the current administration, school administration, it's really the previous administration,
Right.
previous leadership of the school system that started back then. So there really hasn't been redistricting. Now, the good news is the current school board is looking and realizes that they need to redistrict, and it's being done at a time when there's no school being built, which is unique, right?
Right.
So I
And we're-
think,
and we're a couple
so I
of
think
years
there's
away.
goals to try to be able to accommodate this change, but I think, and it also has to do with the fact that this recycling of units where you have neighborhoods turning over, and we're having more and more students, because of the great reputation of the Howard County Public School System, people are coming to Howard County, living in existing homes. There's a lot more existing homes now than there were in 1992, because they've been built. And, that's part of the challenge too, is that a lot of people are moving into existing homes.
And we
So
see the combinations of houses.
I'm not saying new
Well, and
development
it's
doesn't
three-
contribute, but
we
it's
use-
part
Your
of the puzzle.
remediation is
Yeah.
three-pronged. You have redistricting, you have renovations and additions on existing land, you have building new schools on existing land if they are in areas where the need is, and you have finding new land, purchasing it, planning it, building it, which is a much longer process, but the first four are not as long.
Well, to speak
Right.
to what Ms. Delmont Small said the other night, we're going to get to a point, redistricting will not be a tool.
Yeah,
Well, I
right.
think my concern is
That's
we
where
get
we
7
are.
years, and
And
then
that's
it's
not
just
that far
7 more
off.
years of nothing happening, which is not my concern with you currently, but it's just given history, I'm, like when I had to name my baby, my son, we couldn't agree on a name, and the hospital was like, you gotta name him before you go. And my
Right,
husband was
until
like,
shovels are in the ground, it
well, he
is
was
up
like,
in
would
the
more
air,
time have helped? No, I had 9 months to think about it.
And you still couldn't get it
And we
done.
still couldn't get it until he was actually there in the hospital, and
Right.
we had to make the decision, so.
Well, and we also have to think about how the state is going to assist us in terms of
Oh,
funding.
yeah.
Because we can't leave that part out of it. We're not Allegheny County. We're not getting 90% of our
True.
capital projects being funded.
Only about,
Right.
We're. it's more-
40%,
yeah, it's more- We're more in the
42%,
40-50 range.
yeah.
And, we also can't, people always say, oh, you can build an elementary school up. You literally can't. It's against building code for children under 8 to be on the second floor for more than an hour of the day or something. It's been a while since I've looked at the code. But you cannot have a kindergarten class on the second floor. That is illegal in the state of Maryland, according to fire code.
But you could do some of the things that Ms. Christina Delmont Small suggested the
Yeah.
other night, which was adding,
If we have the
putting
space.
additions onto the school.
But then you
So
run
that-
into the cafeteria and
I ju-
gymnasium problem.
I just got
Right, but there-
my fancy
Might
You
be
got your
cheaper.
report?
report.
It
Why
might be
didn't you
cheaper.
share it?
And then-
So we'll be able to look at how much capacity is available on existing school sites and what it would take to get it.
And how, here's one
And
more
how-
idea,
yeah.
and this isn't my idea.
Okay,
This
you
is
get the
somebody
last
else's
word.
idea from the school district, though. And that is, whoever wants to move here can move here. New home, old home, whatever kind of home. But if there's a closed school, they can't go there. They can only go to an open school.
Mm-hmm.
And they can go to any open school they want to go to
But
in Howard
But that's
County.
an equity issue, too.
Yeah, and are we paying for transportation for
And-
that?
right.
Well, and
for
they
the
would have to,
transportation.
and they would have to transport themselves.
Right, but that's
It's-
an equity
yeah.
issue for somebody who's trying to, set up their kids for a better life and moving into,
Yeah.
into an apartment in an established neighborhood that. And transportation, we know that we don't have a good regional transit system in Howard County as
Just
far as
an
public.
idea. I'm just
I know,
saying.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
But, I know, I'm just saying,
Because I'm trying to
make
think
one
about
request on the
everybody.
it's an idea,
Well, I just want to say, there are poorer counties and jurisdictions in this country, especially in California, that do exactly
Yes.
that.
They don't have transportation. They got rid of transportation.
What I'm
for many
saying is
school
that
districts.
they do not do transportation. It is what it is. People like to say the Howard County way. There's a certain way and a certain culture that we have
It's called entitlement.
as far as how we want to do things. We have to ask ourselves, what should this look like moving forward? Because
just gonna say
you
it's
are
expensive.
both Councilwoman Walsh and Rigby are correct. We need more time, but if we get the gift of that more time, we all have to take action. We can't just sit around and say, okay, we've got 7 years, fabulous, we'll worry about it in year 5.25. No,
Right,
we
we've gotta
can't
fight
do
for it
that.
now.
So, but that is also going to take conversations and trying to figure out what should education look like in Howard County, and what are going to be both the operational and capital costs in order to do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we are unfortunately all at that, I think we are at that
Oh,
tipping point.
I think the
Now.
budget season very
Hanover
clearly
Hills is
showed.
closed in our projections. That's a brand-new elementary school.
It's
Yeah, it's crazy.
unbelievable. I know, that's
Right,
crazy.
and we have to all
And
work
there's a,
together to
there's
engage
a
with our
development in the
state
waiting bin for it.
delegation.
Which will get out.
Dorsey, whatever.
The one request I
Yeah.
was going to make to DPZ and Mr. Brown now is prior versions of the school waiting chart, or the bin chart, or whatever it's called, have indicated what year that it's in sequence, and that's dropped off. I think it is important for the community and for the council to know where in that time frame these projects are.
So I have, you can have this, we can make
Oh,
copies.
fabulous.
Copies
Okay.
of it. This
We
is-
would love
All
that.
right, so
this
can we
has
swap
more
that out
details on
then
it. I
for
think I
the-
gave it to the auditor's office, but we can, not blame, it was asked, but.
Great. Thank you very much. I feel like we've started many
Thank you.
conversations, and we look forward to continuing them.
It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.